Cambiar vidas.
Change lives.
Change organizations.
Change
दुनिया में
organizations.
बदलाव.
Change the world.
The SENSEable City Lab is a group at MIT. We're about 25 to 30 people. We're part of the Urban Studies and Planning Department, but we really take a much broader view of what's happening in cities right now, the trajectory of technology and real-time information, and what's coming next. And so when we talk about the future of cities, my director likes to talk about the future of F1 racing, and he's Italian, so he should know. Over the past few decades, F1 has changed completely, and what it used to be was about finding the best driver, which meant the most expensive driver, and the biggest engine and the best car designer to build your car. So it was all about brute force to make your car perform the strongest. But what we're seeing now is your performance in the race depends more on this, on a team of people who are monitoring the state of the car, the state of the track in real time, constantly using sensors, using communication, and it's really much more of a team effort, this kind of real-time control that pushes certain teams ahead of others. So we're seeing that cities are beginning to act like real-time control systems. They're already equipped with networks. They're becoming more and more filled with ubiquitous sensors. And there are now more and more ways of people to remotely control things that are happening in the city. So now that you have this pervasive layer of sensors and networks and actuators all collecting data, then how do you control that city in real time? How do you create an environment that's better than what's there right now? And some of these statistics were mentioned before. When you look at the global growth of wireless technologies, this is just looking at cell phone subscriptions. Starting from 1980s up to 5 billion today, and it's an exponential curve. And companies like Ericsson, they're estimating that it will continue to be exponential. By 2020, we should have 50 billion wireless connections, but those are not all going to be cell phones. So what are they? Well, the history of it was that you had devices that were connecting people to people over wireless technologies, and then people to the network, to the internet, then people to the internet through different interfaces, through their cars, through these objects. And as was mentioned by Cliff, now you have the Internet of Things. You have devices talking to devices, and you have this all over the city, and they're talking to the network as well. So you have a situation where you can think of it as a city as a collection of atoms that are all both sensing and being actuated in real time. And what can happen to the city once you have that kind of finite control? And it matters because, as has also been pointed out, the world is now half urban. This has been written many times. 2% of the Earth's crust is covered by cities, 50% of the population, 75% of energy consumption, and 80% of CO2 emissions. But at the same time, it's not completely dismal because cities are also incredibly sustainable in many ways and energy efficient per capita. Jeff Heller mentioned that urban planning is perhaps the greatest lever we have in controlling our energy appetite. And so we have a similar view. We think that anything you can do to make cities more, the quality of life in cities more attractive and sustainable, the better chance you have at dealing with some of these long-term issues. And so we can also learn from the past and specifically how different technologies like industrialization and the car have really changed the urban fabric and the form of the city. Now we want to look at, it's 2011, we have all this new technology, but we haven't seen yet how it's going to change the form of the city. So what will the future city look like? And this is just kind of a generic picture of a network, but that seems to be one of the main themes going forward with our research this year. And where can technology enable different interactions between citizens and the city and management of space in a profound new way that hasn't been predicted. And the Arab Spring is just one example of how people have appropriated space using technology completely kind of bottom up. And so we're talking about the space between the virtual and the physical, where the virtual is all the data that's being collected in the city and being processed and a lot of it being lost, frankly, and the physical city and all the different ways that we can kind of bridge that gap. The lab itself is divided into 4 groups, looking at urban informatics, urban energy, civic interfaces in real-time city, but I won't go into too many details. The projects themselves are more interesting, but as a quick note of how we're organized, we partner with both cities, public agencies, as well as private businesses. Anybody who has either data that they wish to share and find some use for, and for businesses this makes a lot of sense because they're sitting on a lot of data, especially the telecom companies, as well as device manufacturers and car manufacturers, but they don't know how to create value from it, and cities are also looking at ways to release their data to the public. And so we've done over 50 projects over the past 5 years, but all of them kind of come back to this central question of how do we close this loop between sensing the city and actuating it. So one of the first projects in Rome, 2006, was looking at the city of Rome, looking at the locations of cell phone calls being made throughout the city in real time. We got all this information in kind of a secure package from Telecom Italia. And of course anonymized, and this is one of the big issues that's been kind of going back and forth over the last decade, is how do you protect people's privacy. But first we just aggregated it, and we decided to show what it just looked like over a typical day. But this ended up not being a typical day. This was the finals of the World Cup in 2006. It was Italy versus France, and you see before the match there's the usual kind of daily buzz in different parts of the city. But you can really tell when the match starts because everything goes quiet. Everybody's watching the game. Zidane gets, they both score, it's halftime, second half begins, end of normal time, first overtime, second overtime. Zidane gets a red card for headbutting the Italian player, and then Italy wins in overtime. You can see the city just explodes overnight and continues even to the next day. They end up sleeping pretty late, but then when the team returns with the World Cup, that's when things kind of go crazy again. So you have a way of indirectly, even though you're not watching everybody at the same time, you have an indirect way of seeing what is kind of the emotional state of the city and what are the activities that are going on. People calling each other, people watching a game, people taking a bathroom break. I think there was a nice example of Canada, like all the water consumption spiked during the bathroom breaks during the US-Canada Olympic gold medal match in hockey. So you can start to see where this might be headed. This was another thing we did for that exhibition where we were looking at the real-time locations of buses, which is in the yellow, and the red clouds represent people using their cell phones throughout the city. So you're seeing real-time activity where the pedestrians are, and you're seeing where the buses are, and you're starting to see places where they don't really match up. So now this raises the question, is the public transit system really serving the population in the most efficient way? Should we, instead of having people chase the buses, shouldn't we be having the buses chase the people? And this leads to a more recent project. This is a much kind of fuller kind of exploration of this idea in partnership with Singapore, where we're looking at collecting a lot of real-time data from various agencies and private companies in Singapore and producing visualizations of it. Let's see if I can get this started. You don't really need the audio here. I'm just going to do these quickly. So where people are, this is a similar one to what we had done in real-time Rome, where we're looking at the cell phone usage throughout the city, where is data being transmitted, where is the activity throughout different times of the day. This is relevant to what was brought up before about energy use in the city, in the different buildings, and we're mapping it alongside temperature, so you can actually see the urban heat island in the places where you're also running air conditioners all the time. This is looking at, again, a major event, the F1 race in Singapore, and looking at text messages being sent around the track. Here we're looking at, this is one of my favorites, I'm going to pause here. This is looking at real-time rain, which is a constant issue in Singapore, but it's not everywhere at the same time, and the locations of taxis. And we actually were able to show that taxis are harder to get in areas that it's raining in the city, which is kind of, it caused a lot of problems for a lot of people once that was revealed, so we don't talk about it too much. And then this is looking at the map of Singapore, but we're changing it so that the distance between 2 points is affected by how long it actually takes to get between them. So at any given time, you see the congestion actually expands the size of Singapore. So it takes longer to get to across the island. And then here we're looking at global traffic coming in and out of the airport and the port, both airplanes and ships. And this is the next phase of the Singapore project, but what we're really trying to do long-term is build a platform. As was said before, that you really need, rather than to try to just do all the services yourself, build a platform in which anybody can access this data and build applications on top of it. Some of this is kind of the whole driving force behind the open data movement. But even before you can convince private entities and public entities to release their data, you have to make it kind of intelligible. You have to show people that there is value. So here we're looking at ways of doing interactive visualizations that let people really explore this data in a meaningful way. So here we're looking at bus lines in Singapore, and the data is collected over time. Where are people getting on and off the buses? Where is most of the foot traffic going? And making it very easy for anybody to just flip through this information and find what they're looking for. The next project I want to talk about, how much time I have, is Trash Track. So here we're looking at the global supply chain of materials, and we're starting to get a sense of where all the things that go into our products come from. But how do we know where they actually go after we throw them away? So we were thinking about how sensors have been used to kind of map the flow of things in the body to point out problems in circulation. And so we tried to apply a similar approach where we use GPS tags that actually communicate over the cell phone network and have batteries. They're small enough and cheap enough that you can attach them to thousands of items and just throw them away into the trash stream and see where they go without having to worry about recovering them. So this is what they look like. These are various examples of items that we had tagged, and this is our assistant director performing surgery on a bear in order to tag it. And then we were able to follow these in real time. And I'll skip ahead. Oh boy. Okay, well, there's a nice animation there, but basically this is what we found. And what we see is the vast majority of things end up staying in the state, and they go to places that we would predict. But there's a lot of things that end up going out of the country or just across the country, most of it being electronic and hazardous waste. And we discovered there's really two different waste systems at play here. And the second one, the one that's spreading things farther away, is the one that's harder to predict, and that has a lot of implications about both the sustainability of recycling and the safety of it. Here we're looking at two printer cartridges that both leave Seattle around the same time. They're both HP, and they both end up at the same processing plant in Mexico. But one of them takes a pretty direct route along the rail lines, along the I-5, and the other one actually gets shipped over to Chicago and back. So this raises a lot of questions about, is this really the most efficient way of dealing with recoverable electronic waste? In a kind of follow-up to this project called Talk to Me, we're looking at tracking electronics again, this time small laptops. And we install software that let us track where they go after they've been donated to other countries. And what ended up happening here, this was also then, well, what ended up happening was one of these laptops was actually stolen out of our lab. And we ended up tracking it down to the neighborhood in Boston where the guy had taken it to. And we got it back about a week later. So, don't steal from MIT is the lesson. I'm going to skip ahead. We're doing similar projects now looking at trash in the informal sector. This is Sao Paulo, where we're looking at how waste pickers collect recycling throughout the city. They're not employed by anyone. This is a kind of an independent thing that they sell the materials to make a living. And we're using GPS to track them and really see the portions of the city that they serve. And is this a system that is also scalable and sustainable in a way that first world systems are not? Again, I'm going to skip forward to Copenhagen. This is one of the bigger projects going on at the lab right now. In 2009, we were invited to speak at the Copenhagen Climate Conference. And they wanted to look at is there a way that we can increase cycling in a city where it's already pretty much saturated? Bike use, there are more bicycles than people in the city. And is there a way that you can actually make it accessible to everyone? So they designed a bicycle wheel that just attaches to existing bikes. It's got an engine in it that runs off a rechargeable battery that you can remove and just charge from your home. And it actually assists you as you're going up hills and recovers energy as you're going down hills. So in this way, it tries to make the experience of bicycling through hills, through valleys of a city, the same as just going on flat ground. But at the same time, it's also got sensors that can tell you about the places you've cycled, whether you've passed by friends on your daily routes, but also you can attach air quality sensors. And now you have a mobile platform. Thousands of bikes could be traversing the city at any given time, giving you a real-time look at the air quality at the ground level rather than a few sensors on tops of buildings. You're actually getting relevant environmental data. So this is what it looks like right now. They're still working on prototypes, but they're actually advancing this through a startup. And so that's going to be the way that they hope to scale this up, is to make it an actual product. And then I wanted to touch on something that was brought up by Professor Lee about how do you kind of integrate this technology into the space of the city, into the design of buildings, and make them more responsive. In Zaragoza, we were looking at the use of water, and in this case, an interactive water wall, and how that can kind of open up doors as people approach it, and it can respond to sounds or be integrated into some kind of light show. And we thought, instead of designing just one wall, why not build a whole building, 4 walls all made of falling water? And you can control the water through nozzles all along the roof. And this is a rendering, but this is actually the real thing that was built for the Zaragoza Expo. And so you have ways of showing patterns, of showing messages, of responding to people walking up to the building and opening up doors for them. You can raise and lower the height of the roof to respond to the wind conditions and whether or not you actually need to prevent water from splashing around. This is somebody who just got off a plane and is really puzzled by what he's seeing. And you can also project things onto it. And here's our director, Carla, trying not to get wet. But the most interesting thing that happened is after the expo and after this was all done. What happened was one night they were having kind of difficulties with the system. It was malfunctioning and the sensors weren't working. So water was falling in random patterns and it wasn't, you actually would have a chance of getting wet if you tried to walk through these walls. So this is what it looked like. And what happened was all the kids in the city came out and turned this into a playground. This is no longer the interaction that we were hoping for. It's completely unexpected. And what's happened since then is, now that the expo's over and there's no central body controlling this building, it's been turned over to the public in a way that we didn't really intend either. But we're very happy because now every week the building is managed by a different person. So one week it's a DJ, another week it's an arts group, another week it's a hackers group. And so you have really kind of a bottom-up approach to managing this kind of open infrastructure. So once it was built and put out there, people found creative ways to use it. So you have people doing parties there, putting in educational events, using it for light shows and things like that. So I just wanted to end with this slide, which is it's actually an old roster of the members of the SENSEable City Lab, and it's probably over 50 people here. It's probably twice the size now. We have a lot of people coming and going on 3 or 6 month stays. And it's interesting because the vast majority of them are not from any particular field. We have programmers, we have mathematicians, we have urban planners, architects, and design is always this kind of constant theme of what we're trying to do. But we've also had artists, performance artists, and videographers. And so it's kind of this concentration of talent, and we don't really know where the good ideas will come from. The idea for Trash Track came from a professor who specializes in climatology. And so we really benefit from having all of these kind of different specialties in the lab. And in many ways, it reflects the vitality of cities. And when we talk about innovation, you really need to find ways of bringing these kinds of groups together.
Cambiar vidas,
Change lives.
change organizations,
Yeah.
Change
दुनिया में
organizations.
बदलाव.
Change the world.